Hello, today we are going to look at stem and leaf plots. So a stem and leaf plot is where we have a bunch of data and we're going to group it usually in tens. So here we have the heights of a class of students. We have a bunch of students and we have their heights measured in centimeters. And we can see that we have 152 centimeters, 141 centimeters, 153 centimeters, 175 centimeters, 134 centimeters. What we're going to do is group these in tens. So we would have the people who are in the 150s or 15 tens will be in one group in the stem, and the people who would be 140 centimeters or some variation of 140 centimeters would be in another group in the stem. And then we're going to put the individual units, these bits, out as leaves. And that is how we are going to use our stem and leaf graph, but we are going to look at that in detail now. So whenever we want to do any work with data, it's a good idea to reorder it. However, for a stem and leaf plot, you actually have to do two plots. Well, you effectively have two options. You can reorder this data as a list. So you can order this from smallest to biggest, like we often have to do with data sets. Or you can draw two stem and leaf plots, and that effectively does the same thing for you. So what we can do is either order this list from smallest to biggest as a list of numbers, or we can draw what's called an unordered stem and leaf plot. You're just going to write these numbers down in the order in which you find them, effectively, and then you're going to redraw the same diagram but putting them in order from smallest to biggest. So you can either do the ordering from smallest to biggest to begin with, or you can draw an unordered plot and then redraw an ordered plot. And either will be acceptable for getting full marks, but you must do one or the other. It is a requirement that you do one or the other. And in the exam, they can directly ask you to draw an unordered and then an ordered stem and leaf plot. So you must be familiar with this, you must practice it, but in the long run, you'll be able to pick whether you order the list first and then draw two plots, or do it twice, the other way around. So let's do the unordered and then ordered one, because that's what you must practice for now. So I look at my data set and I have to figure out how many groups, how many items I have in the stem, effectively how many tens I go up in. So I have 150s here, 140s, 150s, 170s. So I'm at the moment going from 140s to 170s. Here 130s to 170s. 130s to 170s. So I'm going from numbers that are in the 130s up to the 170s. So what I'm going to do is start with the smallest group here, the 130s, and that's going to be in the stem, that's going to be 13. So this is 13 tens is the same as 130. And then I'd have 140s, 150s, 160s, and 170s. And my line should go down just a touch further. It should go down a touch further on this one as well. So I now have all of the different groups in my stem. And what I'm going to start doing with the unordered plot, if I have a disorganized list, I'm just going to start writing down those numbers in. So my first number here is 152. So I have in my 150s group, I'm going to put in a 2, and I'm going to put it in the middle of a box, and then I'm going to put in a comma. And I'm going to make sure that I keep all of these very neat and ordered. I'm not going to have these kind of sitting across the lines in my copybook, or I will lose a lot of marks. So I want to make sure I put it neatly in a box and then a little comma after it, and I'm going to keep the spacing between each number exactly the same each time. So I have 141 here, so 140s, and I'm going for a 1, comma, 53, 75, 175 I should say. That looks a little bit like a 6, so let's 134, 134, 145, and I have two of them, 137, comma, 151. I'm not going to make you sit through all of this, so I'm going to fill in this table and then I'm going to come back to you. So now I have my table filled in with all of my units, single digits written in here. So this would be 141, 145, 145, and so on. And I have a little key in here that I must include in a stem and leaf plot to tell me exactly how to translate this from the stem and leaf plot back into the data set that I was given. So 14 and then 14 in the stem and then 3 in the leaf means 143 centimeters. I lose a block of marks if this is not included. It must be included in both the unordered and the ordered version of my list. Now, what we need to do before we go on is now that we have this all nicely written out, we have to put it in order. So at the moment it's unordered. We have 4 and then 7 is okay, but then we go to 2. We want to be going 0, 2, 4, 6, 7, 7. So from smallest to biggest in each one of our lists of leaves, in each one of our going out from our stems. So we're going to rewrite out our table here, but we are going to write everything in order. We're going to keep everything very neat. So 0. Now I'm going through these, they can get quite large, and you can actually see what I've done here as well. I have underlined as I was going through my data set to make sure I didn't miss a number. It is extremely easy to miss a number when you are trying to fill in these tables because they can get very large, and if you get distracted for a moment, it's extremely difficult to figure out where you were when the lists get large. So every time you fill in a number, put a little line underneath it or a little line through it. I recommend underneath it so that you aren't obscuring what the number is, and it just allows you to keep track of your numbers as you go. It's extraordinarily helpful for not making a mistake, particularly when the data sets get quite large, as they tend to in these questions. And when you're going from an unordered to an ordered list, you can do exactly the same thing. So I am going to, I've marked in my 0 there, so I have a line underneath my 0. I've got my 2 here, so I'm going to mark in my 2. My next number is 4. Mark in my 4, and I can keep going back and forth. And I have my 7 and my 7. And I'm going to do that for the rest of my table. Now I have my numbers all filled in, and again I've underlined as I went so I didn't miss any of my numbers. Another check that we can do, because again these lists can get very large, is to count up the number of numbers we have in our stem and leaf and make sure that they're the same as the number of numbers we've got in our data set. So here I have my data set in a grid. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers here, and 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers here. So in total I must have 20 numbers. 4 by 5 is 20, or I have 4 rows of 5 if you prefer to think about it that way. So I know that I have a total of 20 numbers in my list. So I have a total number of 20 numbers in my list. Do I have 20 numbers in my stem and leaf? And I count them up. I'm not going to take up your time with it here, but I got 20 for both of my lists here. So that's a good anchor that tells me, yep, I probably got this correct. So now I have gotten full marks in part 1 here because I have my stem and leaf all marked in. I've done an unordered list, and then I've done an ordered list, and I've done a key that tells me how to translate from this diagram back into my data set. If I miss any of those steps, I miss a lot of marks, and I don't want to do that. Now, let's get into some of the other questions. What is the range of heights of our students in our class? Well, now this is very easy because I have my ordered group. I go from 130 centimeters tall to 175 centimeters tall, and I know that the range is the highest from the lowest to the lowest, I should say. So I get the difference between those two. And I get 45, and I don't forget my units, it's centimeters. Now, what is the median height? Well, I know the median is the middle number when I'm listing from smallest to biggest. So I'd either need to have this list all written out in a row, or I would, from smallest to biggest, or I could use my ordered stem and leaf plot. So I have counted up, I have 20 numbers. So that means the 10th and 11th number are going to be the middle ones. I have 2 middle numbers for this type of question because I have an even number in my data set. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, should have a comma, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I'm going to put this in 10th number and the 11th number. Now I could have made a mistake in that. So how could I double check? Well, I could count back and I say from this middle bit here, I should have 9 numbers going back this way and 9 numbers going up this way. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I have the same number of numbers going back and forth here. So it's going to be the average of 5 and 5, which is just 5. 10 over 2, which is 5. So in this case, it just works out as 5, which is fine. But remember, or if we have an even number in our data set, that's what we have to do, get the average of the 2 middle numbers, because there's no single middle number. And it occurs to me there's a question I'll put it in after here. So what percentage of the students have a height greater than 150 centimeters? So where's 151 centimeters, and it must be greater than 151 centimeters. So that's going to be the people who have 152, 3, 4, 9, and 175. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. So it's 5 people out of our total of 20 people. And I want to turn that into a percentage. So I can either multiply it by 100 over 1, or if I'm able to, this is a fairly straightforward one, I can multiply above and below by 5. To turn it into a percentage, 25 out of 100 be 25%. And I know that I could also on my calculator put in 5 out of 20 multiplied by 100 would also give me my percentage. But in terms of skills we need to develop, this is important. Now I'm going to write in another question for us. So finally, what's the modal height? Well, now I have my nice ordered stem and leaf here. I'm able to see which number comes up the most often. I have 2 137s, 2 141s, and I have 3 145s. I don't have much repetition other than that, so 145 centimeters would be the modal height because it's the most frequently seen. And then finally, is there an outlier height? Well, it's very clear here. There's a huge outlier height. We have one very tall student in comparison to everyone else who's 175 centimeters tall.